Hi friends, this is the basement. We are going to set up two different talking heads today. One of them will be more of a textured, nostalgic, kind of filmy looking talking head. The other one will be a cleaner, more modern one, and then we're going to throw them in DaVinci Resolve and talk about how to grade them differently to achieve those respective looks. All right, we'll start with the more vintage looking one for both. I'm going to have Eleanor, the beloved Ursa Broadcast G2 on my Sachtler Flowtech 75s. I have a Leica R Summicron 50mm on here that is wide open to f2. And I have a scratch mic on top. That's a Sennheiser MKE 600. Not really for any reason, just scratch audio. This is a giant 8-inch Portkeys monitor that I use to make sure everything is looking good while we are recording. If we follow the XLR all the way, my favorite mic to be doing voiceovers or really anything else is the Earthworks Ethos. So we have that set up on the desk already. There's Gerard. He's my placeholder. Since I don't have autofocus, I usually set him up and then use him to check the shot. For lighting, I have a Nanlite FS300B set to 5600 and going through an iFootage spotlight attachment that is firing directly up at the ceiling. This is my key light. It's kind of like a bigger diffused source, but I want it to be higher, but the ceilings are so low here that that's basically the only way to make that possible. I have another C-stand set up with a Zhiyun light that is 60 watts, I believe. It is set to 3200 Kelvin, and that's kind of like my kicker hair light to give a little bit of shape. Those are important if you're going for a more vintage look. And then for shaping, I have a boom arm that is flagging off the window because that window behind there, it is in the middle of the day, so a bunch of light would come through, and then to block the rest of it, I have an ultra bounce turned to the negative side, blocking the entire thing, just trying to control the light just a little bit. And this is what it looks like. There's a couple things to note. The key light is just a regular key light. I'm not really doing too much here to make it look too weird or too stylized, but a lot of times with older shots, when you go and you watch older movies, the lighting is a bit more harsh. Sometimes there's higher contrast. It looks a little bit less natural. And if that's a look you're going for, then feel free to go for that look. You have to make sure that you're dialing in your contrast ratios exactly the way you want them. I don't have it too over the top. I'm trying to control the light here. I like the placement of this light. I think one of the most important things to do is to go back and watch older movies that have the film look and not just guess. There is a lot of backlighting. I have this backlight or this kicker because it's not necessarily above me. It's kicking onto the side of my face a little bit extra. Those are super important for giving shape and communicating the distance in your frame and make it look a little bit more deep, especially old black and white movies. They have tons of backlighting and it looks super cool. That kind of noir style lighting stuck around for a long time. And we are now kind of moving into this era where stuff looks much more naturalistic. So we'll go into that lighting now. For this one, we've jumped up to our second native ISO to bring the entire level up a little bit because we're going for maximum diffused, even naturalistic looking lighting. So now we have our FS300B firing into the wall, and I've created kind of like a book light sort of with this 6x full grid on our boom arm. And that's going to light up everything in the entire room. I have it shaped a little bit with just a flag on my off side so that there's a little bit more contrast. And then the only other thing I've done is put a window gobo in this little iFootage light, and we fired it onto the back wall. The angle isn't exactly correct, but it will at least create the idea that the light's coming through the window and that the lighting is indeed motivated. And this is what it looks like. There's no crazy kicker hair light thing going on here. It is just motivated light, which is a little bit more of a natural look. I do have this flag like I showed to give a little bit more contrast, but that doesn't necessarily make it any bit less natural. It just shapes the light in a way that looks good. So there's like a huge light source right here that's throwing all of this nice soft diffuse light on me. And then like I said, this window back here, this window gobo kind of makes it look a little bit like there's some motivated lighting instead of it just being a random light. We don't want it to look sourcey if we want it to look natural. So we're going to pop these into DaVinci Resolve, and I'm going to show how to lean into these two different looks with different grading techniques. We got our two clips here, and you can see right away that there is quite a difference. These are both straight out of camera, so they are still in log, which is Blackmagic Film Generation 5. I think we should start with the more textured vintage looking one. So the first thing I'm going to do is go up to Gallery, and I'm going to grab my Power Grade, the Sauce. This is just how I start every single clip when I'm grading. Don't worry, I will go through each of these and explain all of what they are doing. So again, here is the log image. Again, this was recorded in the Broadcast G2, which is in Film Generation 5. So right here in the beginning, I have a CST, that's a color space transform. All this is going to do is switch the image from Film Generation 5 and change it to DaVinci Wide Gamut. And then I have another CST down here that is switching from DaVinci Wide Gamut to Rec 709. The reason why there's two of them is so that I can have a standardized wide gamut and gamma to do all of my adjustments in. So when I drop this onto any clip, all I need to do is go to this first one, make sure that the input is correct for whatever log curve that I'm using, and then everything's standardized after that, which is awesome. So this is already set to Film Generation 5, so we are good to go. This is what the shot looks like straight out of camera. I'm going to turn a couple nodes on here that we may or may not use depending on what needs to be fixed, but I have exposure, contrast, and white balance. As you can see, none of these are doing anything. These are just here in case I need to adjust these specific parameters. I'm going to start with the film look. Now I do already have a recipe that I like that is automatic. So when I turn this on, it's going to load up all my settings that I have dialed in already. And we are going to change a lot of these because this is built on the cinematic core look. And when I turn this off and on, you can see that it's not really doing that much. It is changing the contrast a bit. It's shifting some colors. It's really just smoothing everything out. It's not doing a whole lot of crazy color shifting, and it's not leaning super hard into a film look. While we're at it, I am going to turn on my density node as well. And that's another really subtle change. All that is a lot of switching around in the new color slice panel. Just making everything look a bit smoother. This would take quite a while to go through each of these parameters, but it's a fun thing to play with. For now, I want to go back and look at the film look node. But before that, I want to really quick go through how I would adjust each of these. First things first, I would try to get my exposure to where it needed to be. And this looks like a pretty well exposed shot here. I'm going to switch to the waveform so we can see what we're looking at. And I like what I'm seeing here. This looks great. If I was going to need to push exposure or pull it, because this is switching to DaVinci Wide Gamut, what I would do is go into this exposure node. I would go to HDR. Now HDR is already set to use timeline. And just to show you, my timeline is set up to run in DaVinci Wide Gamut. So this adjustment is pretty accurate. If you go to global and you mess with the exposure, it does a really good job of shifting everything around in a way that's natural. Like I said, we don't need to adjust this now, but if we did, this is the way I would come in here and do it. For contrast, this is really going to be subjective depending on how you like to add contrast or take it away or adjust it. Some people come in here to the primaries and they start rocking with this one, changing the pivot up, that kind of thing. I personally prefer to use curves. I feel very comfortable in curves. I can get the look that I want pretty quickly. I would go to this node. I would go over here to curves. I would make sure editable splines is on. And then you can just pick your black point. You can pick your ultimate white point. And then you can grab these and make sure that you're getting a nice smooth adjustment, however you wanted it to look. For now, I'm going to leave that off. As we go through the film look, I might need to come back here and adjust things, but for now I won't do that. In white balance, the way that I white balance is in primaries, and then I switch the node to operate in linear gamma. If the node is set to linear gamma, then the gain dial, instead of just changing highlights, will naturally shift the whole image however you want it. So I'm going to put this on vector scope. And maybe the shot is a little bit too warm, so again, I'm going to make sure that this is set to linear, because if it wasn't set to linear, then it would only affect the highlights. And then I'm going to grab gain and I'm going to cool it down just a little bit. Make sure that we're not getting too much magenta in there. And there's before and after. I think that's looking pretty good. All right, let's get to the fun stuff. I'm going to go through these really quick. Cinematic is not heavy-handed in any direction. It just adds a nice smooth look to it. I add this to basically every single shot that I grade. We got a Kodak look right here. You can see some subtle changes. And I think it looks really beautiful in this set specifically. It's interesting what it does to my green jacket in the background. There is a Fujifilm look. Also beautiful. All three of these are subtly different. It is very fun to go through here and look at them and switch them around and A/B test them and figure out what you like for what. There's a Elated, which has a little bit more of a look. I'm going to go between cinematic and that. A little bit more green popping through. For this look specifically, we're going to build it off of Vintage. It is compressing the highlights a little bit more. There's more color in there. There's a little bit more of a fade to it. I think it looks pretty good. So we're going to start with this. And one way that you could do this is to come in here and start messing with the exposure and contrasts. I suppose there isn't a right or wrong way to do this. You can mess with all of these parameters and get what you like. But I am going to come back into my nodes before here, so I have a little bit more control over the contrast. I think we need a bit more. So I'm going to bring the black point down. I'm going to roll the highlights a bit, bring it down, roll the highlights a little bit, and maybe just a little bit. I like that. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. Yeah, that's looking better. Just for fun, I'm going to take all the nodes that we've messed with already, and I'm going to toggle them. So that's straight out of camera, and that's where we're at right now. We've actually come a far way already. Okay, back to the film look. Here's an interesting tool that you can play with that I don't know I'm going to use today for this shot, but this split tone is really fun to play with. So what you would do is turn it on, max out the amount, and then when you go to hue angle, you're picking the two different hues that you want to push. So by default, you have this kind of pale green and then a little bit more of a flesh tone in here, and then you would adjust the pivot until you are switching the correct things like skin tone towards the warmer tone, and then everything else is going towards green, and then you would dial this way back. And man, those results are actually awesome. I'm definitely going to leave that on. There's another thing I like to add in the film look creator when I'm going for a look like this. I'm going to zoom in on, well, actually, let's go right here so you can see my hat. Blooming. I'm not a huge fan of heavy halation, so I'm going to leave that off, but I'm going to go to bloom. I'm going to turn it all the way up, and then I'm going to mess with some things so that we can see what's happening here. I'm going to pick that radius, and then I'm going to walk this way back. So if you can't see, all it's doing is taking the specular highlights, like these lights right here, and it's adding a little bit of a glow. Now I like it to have a wider radius because if it's too tight, it starts to look a little bit like we're doing this in post, and I want it to blend in really nice, almost like we added a black pro mist or a black satin or something. If you go too heavy-handed, it'll start to look unnatural. We do not want that. There is grain, there is gate weave, there's all kinds of fun stuff in here, but for now, I am going to call it on this node because I am really happy with where we're at. But there is a couple more things that I want to do in this node tree. One of them is grain, and the other is texture. And I think that texture is one of the most important and most overlooked aspects to a proper film look. There is a very specific amount of detail that you want to hit. And most digital sensors, I'd say probably every digital sensor I've ever used, is too sharp. And it starts to look a little bit weird. You can get that look where you clearly shot something on digital and are trying to make it look like it is film if you don't do this properly. And so I'm going to turn grain on so we can see what's happening here. Really quick, I build this off of the 35mm 400T preset, but there's a couple things that I change. I turn the opacity all the way up, and then I adjust how much film grain I want with grain strength. I turn saturation up. I like to come in here and put the midtones lower than shadows and highlights. That way the shadows and highlights have plenty of grain, but skin tone isn't overly swimmy. Let's see here. Grain size is all the way down, obviously, and then I pick a blank-ish texture like here. Make sure that there's not too much. If there is, all you have to do is go into grain strength, pull it down. Since we're going for a film look, I'm going to let it go a little bit heavier. Now, this is what I'm talking about. If we go in to my face, just is not blending very well. So actually what we need to do is come back to this texture node, and by default, I'm at 0.52, which is, I'll show you what it looks like before. That's full sharpness. Straight out of camera. And by the way, this is a 1080p ProRes 422 out of the Ursa. I'm gonna zoom in, turn grain off for 1 second. I'm gonna zoom in until we are really starting to blend everything in. I'm gonna go all the way up to 0.55 for this one. and you turn grain back on, which adds some perceived sharpness. It adds a little bit of detail back. If you're going for a softer film look like this, do not be afraid to add some blur. And I am really, really happy with how this turns out. We're getting some healthy, warm-looking skin tones. The green's punching through. I think that everything looks soft and nice. The kicker looks really good and warm here. I think the key light is working. Very happy with this result. Now, we're going to go over to the more modern clean shot now. Oh, and really quick, I want to talk about Storyblocks because I am super grateful that they are sponsoring this video. I've been writing a lot lately, and I have a couple of short films that I'm really excited about that should begin production sometime this summer. But writing the script is one thing, but figuring out how to visually tell the story through storyboarding is something else entirely. There are some areas and places that are completely inaccessible to me. And even if they were, there's production timelines and shots that get missed. And at the end of the day, sometimes I get back, I load all my footage in, and I have holes in my timeline that I have absolutely no idea how to fill. Storyblocks is an authentic market of stock media made by real artists. They have footage, they have images, they have sound, they have music, they have templates, basically anything that you can think of. They've even launched the Restock Collection, which celebrates the emotion and meaning behind the human experience that generative models just can't replicate. Whether you want a monthly or an annual subscription, they have you covered, and there's no hidden fees, no weirdness. So if you want to get started with unlimited downloads for one price, you can go to storyblocks.com/JakeHayden, or you can click the link in the description. Thanks for checking them out, and thanks to Storyblocks for sponsoring this video. Let's start off the exact same way that we did with the other one. I'll drop the sauce on, and since we just ran through everything, this time we do have some contrast and exposure work to do. So what I'm going to do is go into contrast first, and I'm going to make a little bit of a ramp, because if we're going for a natural look, we want things to look as smooth as possible. So I'm going to raise the black point just a little bit. I'm going to create a little bit of a ramp, and then I'm going to smooth out the highlights a little bit. You got to be careful with this if you're losing detail on anything, if you're clipping. We are not in this shot. I'm just going to work everything until we got a really smooth result. There's before and after. Make sure that the skin tone doesn't look too severe. Yeah, that's not too bad. There's before and after the film look. I'll do density and the film look at the same time. Yes, this is a film look node, and we're going for a clean modern look, but it's not doing anything here besides smoothing everything out, which is a good thing. So I'm going to leave that on there. And again, by default in the sauce, this is working off of the cinematic core look, which we are going to keep. If we did anything else like vintage, we're starting to get a little more heavy-handed. We don't want that. You can make any of these work really, but cinematic will be the easiest for what we're trying to do. Okay, first things first, we need to be more precious about the white balance. Just make sure that we are set to linear, and we are. Go into our primaries and just keep an eye right here. We probably want to push a little bit in the blue direction. Make sure everything doesn't get too purple. For texture, I think that the default 0.52 looks pretty good. For a more modern look like this, you can definitely lean into a little bit more sharpness, but I think it's still a good idea to make sure everything looks smooth. I'm going to leave that where it is, and I'm not going to turn on film grain at all. We want this to look smooth, professional, approachable, and actually, that's about as much as I would do. It looks nice and bright. It looks approachable, it looks happy, it looks like the sun is out. I think that this gigantic key light source looks great, this book light. This practical does not look perfect because the light's coming from over here and it's firing over here, and you're getting some weird shadows when the light should be coming from the left side, but that's totally okay. If we had extra time to set up, we could drag a light outside and throw that through the window, but I am really happy with how this looks right now. If you wanted to go for a warmer look, you would just need to go into white balance, and then you could push this any direction you wanted to. Maybe you could go over there. There's before and after. And that's looking pretty good. And here's what's fun. Here's the two different looks. Look at the difference in my jacket color. It is the vintage look really leans into the coolness of it. There's a lot of nice color contrast in there. There's a lot of rosiness with these practicals being on, but there's something to be said about the clean modern look too. It looks really nice in a different way. You might look at one of these and think, oh, that one looks awesome, and then this other one looks terrible, or vice versa. But being able to pull off both looks is super valuable. Well, hey, thanks for sitting through this whole thing. I'll see you guys soon.